Hi class, welcome to module 4. In this module we'll be working on conditionals. I hope you enjoyed what you learned in module 3 on data types. In this module you'll be working again with conditionals. Conditionals are basically if, else statements, switch statements, making comparisons, etc. So you'll be going through this through the zyBooks readings. You'll be doing practice activities, and again, I highly recommend you do the challenge activities as well. Okay, and you'll be applying this in Stepping Stone Lab 3 assignment for this module. So in this module, you'll also be given Stepping Stone Lab 2 solutions. I strongly recommend that you look through these solutions. These solutions are important to understand what was expected. You'll be able to see how they do things like commenting, the formatting, readability, and just general code syntax and code formatting that you should then take and apply to your future Stepping Stone labs. Okay, so I highly recommend that you review this, make sure you understand what's going on in the code, and use these ideas and techniques in Stepping Stone Lab 3. Okay, so the next thing we'll be going over is the zyBooks. So you'll be doing the zyBooks reading. You'll be going through chapter 6 on conditionals. There is one bit that might be slightly confusing. So in the actual reading and resources at this link here, you'll notice that there are a few sections marked as optional. So 6.5, 6.8, 6.9, 6.10, 6.12 and 6.13 are optional. This is correct. However, when you go to the zyBooks website, you'll notice that 6.8 and 6.9 are actually not marked as optional. So just remember that you should follow this here in reading and resources on the Brightspace website. Okay, you don't want to follow what's marked as optional in the actual zyBooks website. Okay, so you should go by what's marked as optional here. So this is what's going to be graded. However, I strongly recommend that you still go through each of these optional sections. I recommend that you go through all of chapter 6, as each one of these sections are important for object-oriented programming development. And it's going to be important for your learning, as well as important for kind of making sure you address all points of the final project. So even though it's optional, such as like switch statements, strings access operations, string modify operations, etc., I strongly recommend that you go through each and every one of these sections, go through the practice activities, the challenge activities, give yourself as much practice as possible. Okay, you'll definitely benefit from this. Okay, and finally, in Stepping Stone, in Module 4, you'll be working on Stepping Stone Lab 3 on branches. So again, branches is just another way of stating if, else statements. Okay, so you'll be actually applying this in the Stepping Stone Lab and applying it in a way that is connected to the final project. Okay, so let's actually go through the Stepping Stone Lab 3 guidelines. Okay, so this is Stepping Stone Lab 3 guidelines on branches. So you'll be working with how to use conditionals and logical structures to create branches or forks in the code. So in other words, you make different decisions or execute certain pieces of code based on a given condition. So if it's raining, then you bring an umbrella. If it's sunny, then you wear a short sleeve shirt or something like that. So based on some condition, you make a certain fork, right? You make go a certain direction in the code. So this is the idea of branching and if, else, and else statements. So for this lab, you'll be asked to write a short application that uses conditionals, and basically you're going to ask the user for an input, and based on the user's input, you're going to go execute a piece of code depending on what the user inputs. So for example, the user is going to enter the number of cups. You want to ensure and validate that the number of cups is in the right range. So you're going to have conditions that's going to check to make sure that the number of cups is between 1, which is the minimum number of cups, and 100, which is the maximum number of cups. Okay, so you can have conditional statements that checks for this and prompts and notifies the user if it's in the range or if they're outside of the range, and even give them a second chance to enter the number of cups if they enter an invalid number. Okay, so this is the idea for the stepping stone lab. You want to again use the template that's given, which I'll go through in a second, and you want to make sure you follow this template and address all the points in the template, and ensure that you also do things such as commenting, make sure the code is readable. For example, make sure you have indenting, white space used appropriately, and those kind of things. So let's quickly go over the Stepping Stone Lab 3 template. Okay, so this is Stepping Stone Lab 3, the template that's given to you. So you'll note again that the name of the file is different from the name of the class. So again, you're going to have to change this name of the name of the class. The name of the file to match the name of the class. Okay, so you want to make sure you make that change, and then you want to go through and write code to address all of these commented instructions. Okay, so first here you're going to add a constant called constant variable called max cups. Okay, so this is not a variable; it's a constant. Okay, so you want to make sure constant is something that's essentially a variable that does not change. Okay, so you have max cups and you're going to assign it to 100. Okay, then the user is going to be asked to enter in the number of cups between 1 and 100. And this is when you start using your branching, so your if, else statements. So the first thing you're going to do is check to make sure that the user is entering, in fact, an integer. Okay, so you don't want them to enter a string or with letters or a decimal value. You want to make sure they enter an integer. So this if scanner.hasNextInt actually checks to make sure they're entering an integer, that the next entry that the user entered is in fact an integer. Okay, so once it verifies that the user entered an integer, you then assign that integer that was entered to this variable number of cups. So again, this is given to you, right? So this code is given to you. So the next part is what you're going to have to write code for. So this is going to check to make sure that after you verified and validated that the user entered an integer, it goes inside this if statement, right? So it's taking this fork in the code, to now check to make sure that the integer entered is in fact valid. So the first thing it's going to check to see if it's greater than 1 and less than or equal to max cups, which is defined above, right? This is 100. So you're going to make sure that it's in that range. If it is, then you print that that number of cups is a valid number of cups. You're going to print that to the screen. Okay, if it's not greater than 1 and less than or equal to the max cups, right? If it's not in this range, then you go to this else statement. And then if it's not in the range, you're going to want to ask that the user enters in the number of cups again. So, okay, so you're going to notify the user that they entered in an invalid number of cups, and then ask them to enter in the number of cups again and tell them to enter it between 1 and 100. Okay, so you'll notice in the code that it just reads in the next int that the user enters. I would recommend that you, in fact, when you've given the user the second try to enter in another number of cups, that you also check again that the user in fact entered an integer, just like you did up here that was given to you. So on the second try, you should first check to make sure that the user entered an integer, and if they did, then you can assign number of cups to the next integer that's entered. Okay, then you want to check again, right, because it's the second try. You want to check to make sure that the number of cups entered on the second try is in the right range. If it is, you print that it is a valid number of cups. And if you have an else if, so this is a second if statement check. So if this first if statement is not, if condition is not true, right, it's not in the range, then you want to check to see, did they enter something less than 1 or greater than 100? It must have been one or the other if this condition was not true. So if it's less than 1, then you're going to print to the user you entered a number of cups that's less than 1 and you're out of attempts. Okay, then else you're going to print that the user entered a number greater than 100 and sorry, you're out of attempts. So by logic, if it's not in the range and it's not less than 1, that the user entered, then it must be greater than 100. So that's why this else statement assumes that is going to know by default that the user entered a number greater than 100. Okay, so this is the logic that is going here. So this is the idea of branching, how you're going from this if statement, checking this condition is true. When it's true, it goes checks this if statement. If this if statement is not true, it does what's in this else statement, and so on. Okay, so this is the idea of branching. Okay, making different forks in the code based on different conditions. Okay, and you'll notice down here there's this red underline. This is due to the fact that there probably is too many closing brackets. So you want to make sure you use the right number of closing brackets and do not have any errors when you submit your code. Okay, in this else statement, it matches the if statement here. So if this is not true, else it's going to print that there's an error, that this is not a number, right? Because if this is not true, then that means that the user did not enter an integer, and therefore it's going to print that this is not a number, try again. Okay, and then you can make this adjustment or adapt your code for the actual ingredient class that you'll be doing for the final project. But if you do this part down here, do not submit that, right? You only want to submit what's being asked for the Stepping Stone Lab, Stepping Stone Lab 3 guideline, and anything that you do for adapting to the final project, keep that for yourself because you will need that later on, but do not submit that. Okay, so I hope all of this makes sense. As usual, please reach out if you have any questions with the Stepping Stone Labs, with the zyBooks readings, any of the concepts that you're learning, any of the activities that you're going through. Please reach out, either ask me or directly, or post on the discussion topic, and receive help from myself or your peers with the different practice activities and challenge activities on zyBooks. Okay, thanks, and wish you the best with Module 4.